were truly the children of Abraham, you would do the works of Abraham. So really, according to the Messiah, who are the children of Abraham? Those who do the works of Abraham. So let's look at some of the works of Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So that last verse we read kind of reveals to us what the purpose is. What's later Abraham's purpose?
Seed.
To be a source of blessing, right, for all the nations of the earth. That's the purpose. Now, how do we get to that purpose? What's the means to the end?
Yeah, leave this country. Step by faith, obey, and leave not only physically, but in his heart.
Exactly. Or let's put it this way. He had to die to everything that he was familiar with, that he may have been comfortable with, that he was aware of. He had to come out from all of that. He had to be set apart, because that's what we're called to do, right? We're called to be set apart. We're to be, well, Exodus 19, God speaks to Israel and he says, you saw what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bore you unto myself upon eagle's wings. Now if you will indeed hear my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all peoples, for all the earth is mine. You'll be a kingdom of priests and a goy kadosh, a holy or a set apart nation. Alright, so Abram or Abraham is called out to be set apart. But he's not called out to be set apart for the sake of being set apart. He's called to be set apart for the sake of being a source of blessing to all the nations of the earth. Because if he was just going to be called to be set apart and that's it, then why does he deposit him in the land of Canaan and surround him with Canaanites? Because the Babylonians, the people he was called out from, not an ideal people. But the Canaanites, worse. Worse. Yeah. Because when Joshua and the children of Israel come into the land of Canaan, what does God tell them to do to the Canaanites?
Kill them all.
Kill them all. Wipe them out. So he doesn't call him to be set apart to be set apart. He calls him to be set apart to be a source of blessing to all nations. I say that because there is a seductive element to this whole Hebrew roots messianic thing that some people, I think, fall into, and that is we're set apart just to be set apart. I'm different than you are, and never reach the goal of understanding that I'm set apart so that I can be a source of blessing to you. And I might add, not a source of condemnation to you, but to be a source of blessing to you. Might I suggest that our walking according to His commandments is not for me to point out to everybody else what they're not doing or are doing that they shouldn't do. But my trying to walk according to His commandments is me trying to conform to what He wants me to be. And if I spend my energy on focusing on what He's speaking to me, to be conformed into what He wants me to be, then I become a source of blessing for those around me. I become light in the midst of darkness. But we spend, I shouldn't say we, I'm sure that many of you do this, but generally, collectively, we spend far too much time on trying to tell people in church or friends and neighbors what they shouldn't be doing or what they should be doing, when the whole time we should be spending that energy on what I shouldn't be doing and what I should be doing. Yeshua puts it this way, and I'll paraphrase it. Why are you so busy trying to help that other guy get the speck out of his eye before you've even pulled the beam out of yours? Really? That's what we're talking about. So, Abram gives us an example. In short, he's going to be called to die to everything. Country, let me just let that resonate. He's told to get out of his country. And like you said, not just physically, because you can leave something physically and still leave your heart there. You know, Tony Bennett left his heart in San Francisco.
You're just saying.
So he's telling them, die to that. And I have to conclude that, at least in Abram's situation, there was something about his country that if he had stayed attached to it, it would have prevented him from becoming the man that God calls him to be. Or else he wouldn't tell him, leave it. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with his family. He tells him to leave his family, leave his relatives. That's a tough one. But I, again, have to conclude that if he stays there with his family, there's something about his family, if he stays connected to it, that would have prevented him from being the man that God called him to be. He goes one step further, your father's house. Leave everything. By the way, who are my brothers? Who is my mother?
Those who do the will. Yeah.
Those who keep the commands of my Father. It's an important thing to remember. So he tells him to leave all these things behind. Once again, the purpose is to be a source of blessing. And so Abraham is called from the Ur of the Kasdim. The Kasdim are the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans, another name for them is the Babylonians. So aren't we called to come out of Babylon? Why? Because Abram was called to come out of Babylon. Not just physically, but here, consciously, the heart. So we're following in the footsteps of Abram. If you're going to be the seed of Abraham, then guess what? You're going to be expected to do the works of Abraham. So he comes out of Babylon, so to speak. He goes up to Haran. He ends up leaving Haran when he's 75 years old. He leaves his father there. He journeys on with Sarah, and he's got Lot with him. He's going to later have to divide from Lot. Remember? Lot goes one way, Abram goes the other way. He's got to continue this separation process. But anyway, he crosses over into the land of Canaan. Time to go back to the board here. Okay. This is the verb avar. Ayin, resh, avar. And it means to cross or to pass over. So when he crossed over the Jordan, this is the term that would be used. Now, when we take the verb avar, we add the yud to it. The word becomes, and I'm going to try to do this upside down, ivri. And ivri means Hebrew. Because after he crossed over into the land, he was called Avram Ha-Ivri, the Hebrew. So who is a Hebrew? The one who crosses over. And so when he crosses over, he steps into his identity. So he's not a Babylonian anymore, so he's come out of that. Now what is he? He's a Hebrew. Ephesians 2, Paul tells us this, now remember that you once being Gentiles, having no hope, cut off from the covenants of promise. You were afar off. In Bill's translation, you were toast. But now the Messiah has come. Because of the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Messiah, this middle wall of separation has been torn down. And those of you who were not part of the Commonwealth of Israel have now been brought near by the blood of the Messiah. And so he goes on to say, now you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. So then, remember that you once being Gentiles. Well, if I was once a Gentile, then what am I now? If I was once cut off from the covenants of promise, if I was once not part of the commonwealth of Israel, and all that's changed because of the Messiah, and I have been brought near, now I'm partakers of the covenants of promise. I'm now part of the commonwealth of Israel. What does that tell me? Spiritually speaking, I'm no longer considered a Gentile. So what am I? Israel. I've been grafted into that cultivated olive tree in Romans 11. Right? I'm no longer a foreigner and stranger, but a fellow citizen of the saints. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a difference between an Israelite and a Hebrew, or is it pretty much the same thing?
Hebrew, my point in this is, well, let me go back to the question. I don't think so, no. Because Hebrew is that one who crosses over. All right? Now, people have made that to be an ethnic term. But what we want to see is that more than being an ethnic term, it is a spiritual term. Because you can be the physical descendant of Abraham, according to John chapter 8, but not be doing the works of Abraham. So it's a lot more than an ethnic term. Later on, that's going to be fine-tuned for us a bit when Abram gives birth to Isaac.
Right.
Right.
In Isaac shall your seed be called. And then Isaac is going to have two sons, Esau, whom God rejects. Why? Because he despised the birthright. But then Jacob, I have loved, he says. Why? Because Jacob respected the birthright. And then Jacob is going to be born again, right?
Yep.
As
Israel.
So it's the same concept. It's different words, but Israel is just fine-tuning what starts out as Hebrew. So,
It's like becoming the nation, though.
right, it puts some identity on it. It's taking shape. It's taking form. He crosses over into the land, all right? But it begins to take form through Isaac, and then through Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons, become the 12 tribes of Israel. It takes shape.
And then the wedding at Mount Sinai.
Right. So, we've heard the call to come out of Babylon, and we're hopefully coming out of Babylon. Most importantly, here. But then, I'm assuming that you are here because you've crossed over. And by that I mean, you've come to realize that in Messiah, you're not just a friend to Israel. That in Messiah, you are part of this family called Israel. Crossed over. Understanding that we are Hebrew, not because of who our mom and dad are, but because of who the Messiah is. Right? Do we all agree?
Yeah.
All right, so then, after we cross over, watch what happens to Abram. He doesn't arrive. The story is not yet done. Because a famine comes to the land of Canaan. And this famine forces him to go down into Egypt with his wife. And that's where we see that even though Abram is a man who responds very quickly to God's command to come out of Ur, or to come out of Haran, and who responds very quickly to go to this land that he will show him, and he ends up in Canaan, and he comes into his identity, if you will. But nonetheless, we see that there's some things in Abram that come percolating to the surface. And to summarize it, in Genesis chapter 12, he is more concerned about self-preservation. How do we know that? Because he tells his wife, when we get to Egypt, you're my sister, not my wife. Why? Because he's afraid that Pharaoh or the Egyptians will kill him. So self-preservation, love of self, is more important at that point in time than doing what's right. Or, let's put it this way, he's trying to control certain things by his own means. He's seeking to save his life on his terms. And that tells us that at that point in time, even though he's responded to the Creator. And in fact, even though he's called righteous, that doesn't mean he's perfect. And so this environment creates a situation where we find that at that point in time, he's more concerned about his own life than he is trusting the Creator completely. Not only does he do it once, he does it again. All right? So we're going to skip ahead. We find that out about Abram too. What does that mean for you and me? We've come out, or coming out, we're crossing over. Not time to think we've arrived. Because I guarantee you, a famine is coming to Canaan. And this is going to force us to come into situations that we will find out things about ourselves. Maybe things that we didn't think were there. Or maybe things we pretended weren't there. But if we're going to continue on this journey and become the man and the woman that he's intended us to be, we're going to have to engage all of these things that the Creator wants to remove from our lives, those things he wants to develop in our lives, so that we can be the people he intends us to be. So, we'll go on to Genesis chapter 22, and I'll kind of condense this for time's sake. In Genesis 22, Abraham is now called to prove that there is nothing that he would withhold from the Creator. And so he says, I want you to take your son that you love, I want you to take him up to the land of Moriah, to a place that I'm going to show you, and I want you to make him, literally it says, I want you to lift him up as a burnt offering. Of course, Isaac is a picture of the Messiah. He's the promised seed. And he's going to be lifted up as a burnt offering. At one point, Abraham lays the wood on Isaac to walk up to the top of the mountain. Literally in Hebrew it says the tree. So the promised son is to be lifted up as a burnt offering, and his father puts the tree on him to walk up to the top of the mountain. Right? Also, we understand that Abraham knows that if he's going to slaughter his son as a burnt offering, because God promised that through Isaac your seed will be called, and this is how I'm going to be the father of many nations. According to the writer of Hebrews, if Isaac is going to be slaughtered, then Abraham believes God to raise him up from the dead. So he is a complete picture of the Messiah, what the Messiah was to accomplish. But here's what we want to see for what we're discussing tonight. Abraham's an old man at this point, and he's lived his life. And I'll recommend to you that Isaac is the most important thing in his life. Because Isaac is not just his son, he's the promise. And if Isaac dies, the promise dies. And yet when God tells him to do this, he early the next morning gets up to go and do it. And he takes his son to the top of the mountain, he binds him, he lifts him up there on the altar, he raises the knife, and then we see the angel of the Lord comes and interrupts and says, don't touch him, don't hurt him. Because now I know that you're a man who fears God, and that you have not withheld your only son from me. And so then, in Egypt, Abram was a man who was still wanting to preserve his own life. And so at that point in time, he was not trusting God completely. In great measure, yes. Hears his voice, comes out of Babylon, crosses over into the land, and yet still wanting to hold on to life, wanting to kind of take things into his own hands to some extent. But in Genesis 22 we see that this is not the same man. This is a man who would withhold nothing from God. So then, he's not the same guy that was called out of Ur in Genesis 12. Even though God knew on the day that he called him out of Ur, on that day he knew that he would call him to the top of Mount Moriah in Genesis 22. So then, everything that was needed for Abram to develop into Abraham, everything that was required for him to take shape and to take form and to become the man that God intended him to be, I will recommend to you, was present in the very day he called him out of Babylon. Like a seed. Everything's there. It just has to go through the process that He ordains. And as it goes through the process, it grows, it matures, until eventually it produces the desired fruit. And when it produces the fruit, then it's serving its purpose. And you will notice that after Genesis 22, Abraham is never tested ever again. At least there's no record of it. Because what has he done? He has proven, he has shown that there's nothing that he would withhold from God. So I'll bring it back to us, and we'll call it an evening. When I was born again, 20-something years ago, the Bible tells me that I was born again of an incorruptible seed. That incorruptible seed that Peter speaks of is the Messiah, who is the personification of the Word of God, right? I had to be born again because I was shaped in iniquity, according to Psalm 51. I bore the image of the man of dust, according to 1 Corinthians 15. So I had to be born again of that incorruptible seed. But when I was born again, I was eating ham on Easter Sunday. I was wrapping Christmas presents. I was praying in the name of Jesus. I was doing all the things that I'm assuming that you and I have come to understand weren't quite right. A lot of things we learned in church, we've come to understand weren't quite right. Agree? Yep. But the most important thing that I learned in church is still the most important thing today. You know what that is?
Sure.
That's right. That for God so loved the world, that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in Him should not perish. The most important thing I learned in church, or I hesitate to use this word, but just to kind of make the point, to kind of connect everything we've been talking about tonight. Let's just say that church, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but let's just say that church represents darkness. And all of those things that where we grew, where we thrived, where we prospered spiritually, because there's not a doubt in my mind that on the day that I was born again in that church, doing all those other things that I just described, no doubt in my mind the Creator visited me. There's no doubt in my mind I was born again. No doubt in my mind that He loved me and He began to shape me and to mold me. And yes, He used things that were wrong to do what? To provoke me to look to those things that were true. May I suggest that we should not castigate. Not castigate or deride or mock where we come from. Because He used those things. I'm not saying that we learned everything that was right. We were taught things that were wrong. But we were talking, right? Frustration with what you read and what you saw did what? Provoked you to seek. He used that, didn't He? To provoke you to seek. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So we were all born again of that incorruptible seed. But as we've gone down this walk, He has shaped circumstances and environment that has prompted us and provoked us to start to take form into what He wants us to be. We've crossed over. We've come into that identity. We're learning things now that we didn't know before. But by the way, 5 years from now, we'll look back on what we understand right now, and we'll go, why did I ever think that? Right? Because we're going to continue to grow and to mature in the faith. So what I'm getting at is this. When we were all born again, whenever, however, wherever that was, everything that was needed for us to grow and to develop into what He has called us to be was present then. Whether it was in the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church, Pentecostal Church, the Baptist Church, whatever it was. When we were born again of that incorruptible seed, just because we didn't know then some of the things we do now, doesn't mean that there was no life then. It was there. Everything was there. It's just that everything has to go through the process. Everything has to take shape. And it all does at His appointed time, according to His plan. So then, you know what that means? That all of our friends and neighbors out there who do not yet understand these things, that you and I have been privileged.
Yeah.
Privileged. Not because we're special, but because we've been privileged to come into some of these things. That means that all of our friends and neighbors out there, those who have truly been born again of that same incorruptible seed, guess what? Everything is there that's needed for them to grow and to develop and to mature into the people that God has called them to be, according to His plan, according to His purpose, and according to His time. And so then what is my role in this? To be a source of blessing. How am I going to be a source of blessing? If I focus on Him, hear His voice as it relates to me, for me to grow, to mature, and to take shape into the person He's called me to be. If I do that, if I function in my purpose, if I produce the fruit that I'm supposed to produce, then I become, you become, we become a source of blessing for all those around us. And to expand that out a little further, we become light in the midst of darkness. Isaiah 60 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Darkness shall be upon the nations, and deep darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise over you, and His glory shall be seen upon you. And kings will be drawn to the brightness of your rising."
Wow.
You see, darkness it's almost a prerequisite for the light to function in its purpose. Because if you have a light out here on the freeway in broad daylight, a menorah, you put that menorah out there in broad daylight, and all these people are whizzing up and down the highway, how many people really take notice of it? Few. But if you kindle that same light and you put it out here on the freeway and it's dark, light's not different. Same light, it's just the circumstances have changed. And you and I don't change circumstances. He changes circumstances. He changes the environment. He forms light and He creates darkness. When darkness comes and that light is burning, now how many people notice?
Right.
So what is my function? What is my role? What am I to do? To be a light. What is Israel's mandate? To be a light to the nations. And I would say that doesn't mean necessarily to try to hold back the darkness. Because the darkness is what accentuates the light. So, we have a great responsibility. And I could go on and on and on and on and on. But I won't. I'm going to try to stop now because Bill's got to get up early. I know that many of you have to get up early. But it's upon my heart to share with people that this whole Messianic thing or Hebrew roots thing is not exclusively about tying tzitzit on your belt loops. It's not exclusively about pronouncing the name of Yud Vav He exactly correct. I'm not saying that those things are important. I'm just saying that that's just some of the manifestations of being a set apart people. But we're not called to be set apart just for the sake of being set apart. We're called to be set apart, but we can be a source of blessing. So that's what's on my heart. I appreciate you coming out tonight and letting me share that with you. I hope that it was worth your while. All right? Thanks.
I'm tired of my neck.
If you can, he just comes, he doesn't charge us, and his family comes a long way, so we'd like to do that. They also have some products if you're
Mom goes
interested.
upstairs.
I guess there is
We will
DVDs
not
in
let Susie.
the other room if you'd like to see it. So I'm just going to pass it.
I won't even let Susie in her room. Not even.
But that's.
Oh, no problem at all, yeah.
Why can't